Israel, a nation forged between divine promises and earthly struggles, settled in the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua after a prolonged exodus from Egypt and years of wandering in the desert. As time passed, the 12 tribes that made up this nation failed to establish a lasting centralized government. Instead of kings, during periods of crisis, leaders called judges emerged. These judges decided disputes and, driven by divine mandate, led the people in times of war and peace. Before the monarchy was settled as the model of government, these judges became the pillars of guidance and endurance for Israel. Othniel, which also means Lion of God, was born in the tribe of Judah, a descendant of Hezron, son of Pharez, son of Judah. His father's name was Shenaz, and he was the younger brother of Caleb, one of the 12 spies who explored the Promised Land. Othniel grew up amid the conquest of Canaan under the leadership of Joshua, Moses' successor. Othniel demonstrated his courage and faith when he accepted the challenge of his uncle Caleb, who offered the hand of his daughter Achsah to the one who would take the city of Kiriath Sepher, a Canaanite stronghold. Othniel attacked and captured the town, later changing its name to Debir, and married Achsah, with whom he had 2 sons, Hattath and Meonotai. Othniel became the deliverer of Israel when the people turned away from God after the death of Joshua and the elders who succeeded him. God allowed Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, to oppress them for 8 years until the Israelites cried out to him. Then God raised Othniel as the first judge of Israel and gave him the power of the Holy Spirit to defeat the enemy. Othniel ruled Israel for 40 years, during which time the country enjoyed peace and prosperity. Othniel followed the example of his uncle Caleb and Joshua, who were faithful and obedient to God. Othniel taught the people to follow God's law and not to mix with the pagan nations that surrounded them. Othniel died at an advanced age and was buried in his homeland, in the mountainous region of Judah. His death marked the beginning of a cycle of apostasy, oppression, repentance, and liberation that would be repeated throughout the history of the judges of Israel. Ehud, meaning the strong, was a man of the tribe of Benjamin, son of Gera and nephew of Caleb. He was left-handed and skilled with the dagger. He was the second judge of Israel, after Othniel, and delivered the people from the oppression of Eglon, king of Moab, who had subdued them for 18 years. The Israelites sent Ehud to bring tribute to Eglon, who was very obese. Ehud had made himself a double-edged dagger and hid it under his clothes in his right thigh. After delivering the tribute, Ehud told the king he had a secret message from God. Eglon ushered him into a private room and rose from his throne. Ehud took advantage of that moment to pull out the dagger with his left hand and plunge it into Eglon's belly. The sword went so deep that the fat covered it, and he could not pull it out. Ehud left the room, locked the doors, and escaped. Eglon's servants were slow to discover that their lord was dead. Ehud arrived in the hill country of Ephraim and blew the horn to summon the Israelites. He told them God had delivered the Moabites to them and encouraged them to follow him. The Israelites took the fords of the Jordan that led to Moab and let no one pass. They killed about 10,000 Moabites, all brave and sturdy men. Ehud ruled Israel for 80 years, during which time there was peace and prosperity. He was a brave man, faithful and obedient to God, who used his skill and cunning to deliver his people. SAMGAR. Shamgar means the one who flees. He was the third judge of Israel, after Othniel and Ehud. He was the son of Anath, a name that could indicate his Hittite origin or warrior status. He belonged to the tribe of Benjamin, the same tribe as Saul and Paul. SAMGAR faced the Philistines, who lived on the Mediterranean coast and were Israel's main enemy then. The Philistines had a military advantage, possessing iron chariots and metal weapons. SAMGAR was not intimidated by the Philistines and attacked them with an ox prod, a pointed stick for herding cattle. With this improvised weapon, SAMGAR killed 600 Philistines, an extraordinary feat. SAMGAR liberated Israel from the oppression of the Philistines and restored peace and security to the country. It is unknown how long he ruled nor what other deeds he performed, but his name was engraved in the people's memory. SAMGAR was a brave judge, faithful and obedient to God, who used whatever he had to fulfill his mission. Barak and Deborah. Deborah exercised her leadership under a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, where the Israelites came to her to settle their disputes. At that time, Israel was oppressed by Gideon, the king of Canaan, whose commander, Sisera, had a powerful army with 900 iron chariots, a military technology superior to that of Israel. Deborah summoned Barak, a military leader of the tribe of Naphtali, and conveyed a message from God. He was to gather an army and confront Sisera on Mount Tabor. Deborah promised to accompany Barak, although she prophesied that the victory would not bring him honor but would be delivered to a woman's hands. Barak and Deborah gathered an army and engaged Sisera's forces in the plain of Esdraelon. An unexpected storm muddied the field during the battle, rendering Sisera's iron chariots useless. The Israelites won a decisive victory, and Sisera fled on foot. The second part of Deborah's prophecy was fulfilled when Sisera sought refuge in the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Jael took him in, hid him under a blanket, and when Sisera was asleep, killed him by driving a stake through his temple, thus securing Israel's victory over Gibeon. After the battle, Deborah and Barak sang a song of victory, the Song of Deborah, recorded in Judges chapter 5. This song is one of the oldest examples of Hebrew poetry. It celebrates Israel's victory, highlighting the women, Jael and Deborah, who defeated Israel's enemies. Gideon. Gideon was the son of Joash of the tribe of Manasseh. He lived at a time when the Israelites had forsaken God and suffered oppression from the Midianites, who stole their crops and animals. One day, while Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and told him that he was the one chosen to deliver Israel from their enemies. Gideon was surprised and felt unworthy of this mission. He asked the angel for several signs to confirm that God was speaking to him. The angel agreed to his requests and showed him his supernatural power. That same night, God commanded Gideon to tear down the altar of Baal that his father had in his house and build a new one for the Lord. Gideon obeyed but did so at night, fearing the people's reaction. The next day, the townspeople were enraged to see the altar of Baal destroyed and demanded that Gideon be handed over to kill him. But Joash, Gideon's father, confronts them and tells them that if Baal were a true god, he would defend himself. From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means let Baal contend. Meanwhile, the Midianites and their allies had gathered in the valley of Jezreel to attack Israel. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon and prompted him to blow the horn and summon the Israelites to war. Thousands of men came to his call, but God told Gideon that there were too many and that he must reduce his army. God gave Gideon 2 criteria for selecting his soldiers: being brave and drinking water with their hands and not their mouths. Thus, out of 32,000 men, only 300 were left. God revealed to Gideon his plan to defeat the Midianites. He told him to have his men carry a trumpet, a torch, and an earthen vessel. At night, Gideon divided his men into 3 groups and surrounded the enemy camp. At a signal, they all blew the trumpets, broke the pots, and held up the torches, shouting, "For the Lord and Gideon." The noise and light caused panic and confusion among the Midianites, who began to kill each other and flee. Gideon pursued the fleeing Midianites and called for help from the tribes of Ephraim, Manasseh, Asher, and Naphtali. The Ephraimites captured and killed 2 Midianite princes, Oreb and Zeb, and presented them to Gideon. The Manassites, Asherites, and Naphtalites cut off the Midianites at the Jordan and annihilated them. Gideon pursued after the 2 Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, and overtook them at Karkor. He defeated and killed them there, taking the golden ornaments on their camels. Gideon returned victorious to his land, taking with him the heads of Zebah and Zalmunna. The people of Israel offered to make him king, but he refused and said that the Lord alone was their king. However, he asked the Israelites to give him part of the spoils of the Midianites. With the gold he obtained, he made an ephod, a priestly garment, which he placed in his city Ophrah. This ephod became an object of idolatry for Gideon and his family. Gideon had 70 sons and a concubine who bore him another son named Abimelech. Gideon died peacefully and was buried in his father's tomb. After his death, the Israelites went back to worshipping the Baals and forgot God and what he had done for them. Jephthah. Jephthah was the son of Gilead and a prostitute. He was rejected by his half-brothers, who threw him out of their home and denied him his inheritance. He took refuge in the land of Tob, where he became the leader of a band of adventurers. The Israelites had fallen into idolatry and were oppressed by the Ammonites, who invaded their territory. The elders of Gilead went to find Jephthah and asked him to be their leader to fight against the Ammonites. Jephthah agreed but made them swear they would recognize him as their leader if he won the battle. Jephthah tried to negotiate with the king of the Ammonites, but the king would not listen. So Jephthah made a vow to God, saying that if he gave him the victory, he would offer him as a burnt offering the first thing that came out of his house to meet him when he returned. God gave victory to Jephthah, who defeated the Ammonites with great havoc. When Jephthah returned home, the first thing that came out to meet him was his only daughter, who played the tambourine and danced. Jephthah tore his clothes and said that he had made an irrevocable vow to God. His daughter asked him to fulfill his vow but begged him to grant her 2 months to mourn her virginity with her friends. Jephthah gave it, and after 2 months he offered her as a burnt offering to God, according to her vow. The daughter of Jephthah was mourned by the maidens of Israel, who instituted a custom of going every year to weep for her for 4 days. Thus, the prophecy of Deborah, who had said that the glory of victory would belong to a woman, was fulfilled. Jephthah ruled Israel for 6 years, and then he died and was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. During his rule, he had a conflict with the tribe of Ephraim, who accused him of not having called them to war against the Ammonites. Jephthah fought them, defeated them, and slew them at the fords of the Jordan, distinguishing them by pronouncing the word Shibboleth. Samson. Samson was a Nazirite, consecrated to God from before he was born. His barren mother was visited by an angel who announced that she would have a son who would deliver Israel from the Philistines. The angel told her she should not cut the boy's hair, for that was where his supernatural strength came from. Samson grew up and fell in love with a Philistine woman he wanted to marry. On the way to his wedding, he killed a lion with his bare hands. He then proposed a riddle to the Philistine guests based on the honey he had found on the lion's carcass. The Philistines, unable to solve it, pressured Samson's wife to get the answer out of him. When Samson learned of the betrayal, he was enraged and killed 30 Philistines to pay the price for the riddle. He then abandoned his wife, who married another man. Samson returned to seek his wife, but his father-in-law refused her. Samson then avenged the Philistines by setting fire to 300 foxes tied 2 by 2 by the tails and setting them loose in the wheat fields. The Philistines, in retaliation, burned his wife and father-in-law. Samson, in turn, attacked them and defeated them with an ass's jawbone. He then took refuge in a cave, where he was pursued by the Philistines and the Israelites, who feared his wrath. Samson gave himself up to the Israelites, who bound him and handed him over to the Philistines. But the Spirit of God came upon him, and he broke the ropes that bound him. With the same jawbone of an ass, he slew 1,000 Philistines and uttered a famous phrase, "With the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of an ass have I slain 1,000 men." Samson fell in love with another Philistine woman named Delilah, whom the Philistine princes bribed to discover his strength's secret. Delilah insisted on Samson until she confessed that if they cut his hair, he would lose strength and become like any other man. Taking advantage of the fact that Samson was sleeping on her lap, Delilah cut off his hair. She called the Philistines, who captured him, gouged out his eyes, and took him to Gaza. There, they put him to grind grain in prison while his hair grew back. The Philistines held a great feast in honor of their god, Dagon, and brought Samson to mock him. Samson asked a boy to lead him to the pillars that supported the temple and prayed to God to restore his strength one last time. Then he pushed the pillars with all his might, and the temple collapsed, killing more Philistines than he had killed in his entire life. Thus Samson, Israel's most famous judge, died. Samuel, the bridge between judges and kings. Samuel means God has heard. He was born in answer to the prayer of his mother, Hannah, who was barren. Hannah dedicated him to the service of God from birth and took him to the tabernacle at Shiloh, where he was raised by the priest Eli. There, God called him by name and revealed his will to him. Samuel became the spiritual leader of Israel after the death of Eli and his sons, who had sinned against God. Samuel traveled throughout the land to judge the people and teach them God's law. He also helped Israel defeat the Philistines, who had oppressed them for many years. God spoke to Samuel often and gave him words of wisdom and prophecy. Samuel consulted God when the people of Israel, like the other nations, asked for a king. God told him to grant their request but to warn them of the consequences of having a human king. Samuel anointed Saul of the tribe of Benjamin as the first king of Israel at God's command. Saul reigned for a few years but disobeyed God and lost his favor. Samuel would also anoint David, from the tribe of Judah, as the future king of Israel after God chose him to succeed Saul. David was a young shepherd boy, brave and pious, who had killed Goliath, the Philistine giant, with a sling and a stone. Samuel anointed David secretly, and the Spirit of God came upon him. Samuel maintained a close relationship with David and supported him in his difficulties with Saul, who persecuted him out of jealousy. Samuel died at an advanced age and was mourned by all of Israel. He was buried in his hometown of Ramah. Samuel was the last of the judges and the first of the prophets of Israel. He was a faithful and obedient man to God who served his people with justice and love. The judges were leaders that God raised to guide his people in times of crisis when the Israelites turned away from him and were attacked by their enemies. With his unique character and distinct abilities, each judge faced unique challenges. Still, they all shared a common purpose: to restore justice, faith, and order to a troubled land. Their impact on Israel was profound and lasting, not only politically and militarily but also spiritually.